Hello and welcome to Kody and Korbin Have a Podcast, the show where two former roommates talk about a new movie every week. This week on the show, we're celebrating the holiday by talking about a movie that shares its name, John Carpenter's Halloween from 1978.
Halloween night. A small American town. 15 years ago. Michael? Halloween.
I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
Started a huge franchise of movies that have continued on with their latest release, Halloween Ends, this year. So I think it's going to be a great one to talk about. As always, I'm your host, Korbin Zvokel, and joining me as my co-host, a man in a mask, Kody Webb. Kody, how's it going?
Great intro, good from you there, Corbino. But yeah, going great. I think it's gonna be a fun episode. Obviously, very holiday themed, but should be a good one. Excited.
Like our last episode where we talked The Conjuring, we needed to bring in another horror expert, and we got a guy who loves Halloween, loves everything about the franchise, from what I understand. So welcome to the show, a psycho in his own right, Tyler Cagle. Tyler, how are you doing, man?
Not too bad.
Now, do you remember those days of the Psycho Cagle? Do you want to explain to the people what that means?
Yeah, I don't have. I'll talk about it. There was, I don't know if we were juniors or seniors.
Sometime in high school.
Yeah, and Corbin's real good friends with one of my friends, Jake, and me and Korbin are close through that mutual friend. And we were going to B-Dubs one night, Jake and Korbin and all of his friends, and then me. And I didn't have any money on me, and I wasn't going to make out on B-Dubs. And I ended up taking like a sack full of quarters, and I paid for my entire meal in quarters.
Which particularly Dylan Gaskell, shout out to him. He thought that was a little bit of a psychotic behavior, so you became Psycho Cagle, at least to him. Might have translated across. Not necessarily a nickname you loved, but it's very fitting for the type of movies that you like. So,
for sure.
I guess, maybe he knew something that everyone else didn't. I'm curious, Tyler, why do you want to talk about Halloween specifically?
Why? Well, especially with it being October and Halloween just being right around the corner. I just think it's one of those movies that is just easy to talk about because, it has so much to do with the holiday in general. And with it being a movie that came out in 1978, for it to be that independent film that has been able to spawn a whole 44-year time period of 13 films is just something that I think is incredible. Absolutely.
It's, the beginning of, like you said, 44 years of movie history and horror movie history. And it's kind of that, it's not the first slasher movie, but I would say it's like the quintessential slasher movie, no doubt. Kody, I don't think you've seen this movie, right?
No, definitely not.
No? Okay, well, let's throw it over to initial thoughts.
Good morning, Vietnam!
Another first-time watch for Kody. What did you think watching Halloween for the first time?
Yeah, I thought it was definitely interesting. And to bounce off what you guys are saying, what it spawned is kind of ridiculous. You can look at some of the biggest franchises, and I think this is, for a starter movie of a franchise, this is probably one of the high points of that. The obvious one is Fast and Furious. I feel like the first 3 stuck. The first one of the Halloween, it's actually pretty good, which is weird. But yeah, initial thoughts, just off the top, I thought it was really funny as well that Jamie Lee Curtis, this is her introduction sort of movie. I think always looking back on that, and we had the same thing with Holes with Shia LaBeouf, this is a well-known actor, but back in the 70s, nobody knew who that was. So I think that's cool. And then, in general, I'm probably not as high on this movie as probably you guys are going to be. And I thought he was kind of, because in going back to a couple episodes ago of KHAP, Mina brought up that this has a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, which after viewing it, I think that's ridiculous. I think this may be the most overrated movie of all time on Rotten Tomatoes. There's a lot of things I like, but there's a lot of things that I dislike about this movie as well. But we'll get into it all. But definitely a great pick for holiday.
All right, and we'll throw it over to you, Tyler. Maybe just even generally speaking about the Halloween franchise as a whole. How do you feel about it? What does it mean to you? And just, initial thoughts about this movie.
Well, I'm kind of like what Kody said. This is definitely the high point in the franchise. But what I find interesting about the franchise as a whole is it's one of the only movie franchises that has its own, you could pick your own timeline. There are so many reboots and kind of movies that kind of ignore one sequel to restart another sequel, which I think is interesting. But I can 100% see where you could think it's overrated. And, I mean, listening to Jake's episode just to prepare for this interview, where he said that just because it's his favorite movie, it was going to be a perfect rated. I'm not going to go into that. It's definitely not my favorite movie of all time, but I think it's one of the most important horror movies of all time.
Yeah. And I agree with that too. I think just what this movie did is almost better than the movie itself. So I feel it's in general, it's a slow burn slasher where, Mike Myers, what's his body count here? 5. It's not too crazy, but what makes it good, I think, is the direction from Carpenter. The camera work, that opening scene is probably my favorite one, where it's the POV of a young Mike Myers. But I feel the aesthetic of the movie, obviously it's on Halloween. It's just this unkillable guy just going after these kids and nobody can really do anything about it. I think the simplicity of it is kind of what makes it great.
As the franchise goes on, whether Michael Myers is just some regular crazy guy or if he's a supernatural entity that is unstoppable varies at different points. And this one I think is relatively grounded. Obviously he still gets shot multiple times and is fine, but for a starting point, he kills lots more people in the future movies. It is more grounded and more almost scarier in that regard, because it's here's this suburban town in Illinois that's just terrorized on Halloween night by this remnant of this old memory that happened 20 years prior, which I think is really interesting. You mentioned Carpenter. Obviously we've talked about some of his movies a little bit, The Thing in the past, Big Trouble in Little China. He is just a really great director, and he works with this extremely low budget to create something that's extremely spectacular. The characters are wearing their own clothes because they didn't have a costume budget. A lot of the scenes are really dark because they couldn't afford more lights to put in the scenes. Carpenter writes the score himself because he can't afford for someone else to do it. And it's one of the most iconic scores of all time, that just shrill, it is so recognizable and really adds to the horror of this. I think there was a story where he showed a final cut of the movie to someone before the music was put in, and they're like, this really isn't scary at all. And then later they watched it at the premiere and they're like, wow, with the sound effects and the music, this is ramped up 10 times. And I really do think that plays into it. And something we talked about in the last episode is that ability of low budget, high at the box office. $300,000, 17-day shoot. This movie made $47 million at the domestic box office. And that's in 1978, which now is, a huge amount of money. So definitely really cool. And it definitely interesting to see the way it spurned countless, reboots, remakes. There's the Rob Zombie ones. There's the legacy sequel ones that they've been doing now. They did the third one, Season of the Witch, which was an anthology series in itself. And it's definitely cool to kind of go back to the very beginning.
It's definitely an interesting franchise. And to bounce off what you were saying a little bit earlier, I think the realism, probably this is the most realistic Halloween movie. I haven't seen them all. I've seen a couple actually, but not the original for some reason. I've seen the third one, which I'll talk about later, which is really interesting. But going back to our Conjuring episode, that's what I think is the scariest stuff. It's the most realistic. So later on in the franchise, obviously it does turn into something different, which is understandable since there's 15 movies. But I think on a scariness level, this may be up there with the best of the franchise. I think just because the body count is low. Which is kind of ironic, but yeah, I definitely agree.
Last thing I'll say, you said introducing Jamie Lee Curtis. Jamie Lee Curtis is great in this, and thank God that we were introduced to her for sure. And we'll move on to roll credits.
Roll credits.
And I think, the first thing to hit on is that introducing Jamie Lee Curtis is definitely an interesting title. She's been in these movies in 6 different decades, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, 2020s now at this point, which is crazy that this just like one movie that she did when she was a teenager has now given her this long, illustrious career. Obviously, she's been in a lot of other great stuff. Two of my favorites, Knives Out and Everything Everywhere All at Once, two good performances, though more supporting. But it's definitely just cool to see her as kind of the final girl in this film.
Agreed. And the opening as well, I think, along with that, is the music, which you brought up already. I mean, super
the music
iconic.
and the font and the orange lettering. It's very like Halloween. That sticks throughout.
Yeah, it's unbelievably iconic. I think it it just resonates forever, just with the holiday, which I think is really cool. But the opening and then that POV, like I was talking about, the opening is genuinely my favorite part of this movie. If you just like cut that, it's probably only like 5 minutes. Just like the opening crawl, that was probably the best like opening crawl because of like the characters and the actor names and stuff. That might be my favorite part of the movie, which is really weird. But yeah, I think another interesting question is this a good title? I would say it definitely is. But like compared to the other Halloween titles, I think there might be better ones. I mean, they had to get creative with like 15 movies, like I said. So I don't know if this is like the best Halloween title, if that's even an argument. But yeah,
I think for a first movie, you got to start simple. So I think Halloween's a good start. Tyler, what do you think about the title and the credits as a whole?
Well, so like I know like the opening credits where they're going through like all the cast and everything in there, and it's just like that pumpkin with the orange font and the names and everything. I think that it's pretty simplistic, but I think it does its job. And there's like a lot of like hidden, like what I like about John Carpenter is like he hides things in the movie. I'm sure, I don't know if you guys caught this when you guys like seen the opening intro of the movie with the pumpkin, and it focuses on like one of the eyes and the nose. If you like just pay attention to the shape of that, which is also interesting because in the credits, you have like the young Michael Myers and you have the old Michael Myers, and you have the shape. And that's how Myers is credited as in the movie. It's called The Shape. And if you just pay attention to the shape of the eyes and the nose of the pumpkin, it looks like Myers like masked with the nose being like the knife, which I think that's interesting. I don't know if it was done on purpose, but if you like look back at it now, you can kind of see like the mask and the knife. And then another thing I think interesting about like the title of the movie, this one, out of all 13, this is the only one that's called John Carpenter's Halloween. I think he was like ready to do this one and then go on to something else. Because all the other ones, they dropped the John Carpenter's name on that.
Yeah, and that's something that, he does in other films, even like I recently watched Vampires. It's John Carpenter's Vampires. He's kind of one of those like last like true auteur filmmakers where it's like, this is John Carpenter's Halloween. Like this is truly his movie. Obviously he makes stuff like Escape from New York and The Thing as well. And he's just very involved. It's interesting to see though, like in Halloween 2 and he's kind of involved with Halloween 2. It's not his movie. He doesn't direct it, but he's still, around, and he produced it and he wrote it. And then like Halloween 3, which we talked about, is a little bit different. That was like written and directed by Tom Lee Wallace, who was the editor on the original Halloween and the production designer. So like there's a little bit of connection. As we move later and later in the franchise, we go further and further away from that like true John Carpenter nature. Going on with that, I think he just does a really great job of creating atmosphere and ambiance, and that's really important to this story, to this Halloween story, that feeling of like Halloween night. And I think those credits, the pumpkin with the creepy knife cut out and just the lettering does a great job of kind of introducing us to that feeling, and that it's like you're there on a Halloween night, which I think is really great. Let's move on to the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I'll get us started with the good stuff here. I do think there's some pretty decent kills, some pretty scary moments. I think the stuff that John Carpenter does a really good job of is the moments when you expect there to be a jump scare or you expect there to something to happen, but it leaves you hanging. Particularly the very first kill is really drawn out. She like goes into not the very first kill, not the opening one, but the first one that Michael Myers does as an adult. She leaves the house. You see him looking at her in the window while she gets undressed. She takes the girl across the street. You see him pop up behind the car. She tries to get in the car, the door's locked, she goes back inside, gets the keys, comes back out, and it's all foggy inside. And then finally, Michael makes his return. But I think it's just a super well-directed movie. There's so many times where there's just like a dark spot in the frame and you're waiting for Michael Myers to jump out. And sometimes he does, and sometimes he doesn't. And Carpenter's a master of kind of timing those perfectly. And once that first kill does happen, things ramp up pretty quickly where it's like, okay, we've broken the seal. Now we can kill more people, because really it's like the last 40 minutes of the movie that we get like those 5 kills happening. Whereas the first, hour is less, involved. Also, just like even the scenes like where people are driving in cars, I think are really well directed. Each one's kind of different. There's some shots from behind, some shots from forward. It just kind of switches it up, and it keeps you interested throughout. I'll throw it over to you, Tyler. What's the good stuff about Halloween?
Well, one of my personal favorite things, obviously the music and the score, just kind of gets you like in the anticipation. I think that all goes together: the music, the score, and the anticipation of like. Obviously, I've seen the movie, so I know what's happening next, but like I still don't know what's going to happen next. I get that feeling. And then another thing, I think it's paced very well. With it being a movie that came out in 78, I think the runtime's like an hour and 38 minutes, which for me, I mean, is nice sometimes, because now watching movies in 2022, you get to the thing and you're sitting there and you got to devote 2 hours of your time to watch a movie. And I think having that shorter movie time with, I don't want to say more going on, because there are parts in the movie that kind of drag on, but I think just paced very well for it being only like an hour and 38 minutes or whatever, however long it is. And then so kind of like how you were like saying about like how like the shots of the vehicles and everything, one thing I enjoy about the movie is if you pay like the background or like is so important to this movie, because there are shots where Loomis and Sheriff Brackett were talking at the hardware store. I mean, Michael Myers drives right past them, like he's in the vehicle driving right past him. I think that kind of adds like an eerie feeling, because like, it's like, well, he's right there and he just waits.
That's cool. And I think like on a rewatch for me, like you brought up a couple things I didn't even notice. So I think that's really cool. So you're just like the rewatchability of this movie as well. Yeah. Is definitely a big positive.
Like you guys had Jake on a couple times, Jake Ross, and he just watched it for the first time a couple weeks ago. And I watched it with him because I had to watch it with him, get his first time experience with it. And like there were like points where like I paused it and I was like, well, I've seen this movie 20 times probably. And there are points like where I've seen it for the 21st time, and there's like I didn't even notice that for the first 20 times I've seen it.
Yeah, that's cool. Small details. I mean, Carpenter, like you said, I feel like that is one of his best things. And kind of to balance out, well, I do kind of disagree with you guys a little bit, but I'll start off with the good. And she's been mentioned. Jamie Lee Curtis, I think, is great in this movie. The other actors, I don't know, but like they're decent. I feel like it is her movie. She's probably on screen like at least an hour, I'd say. It is the majority of her. And then as well, something we haven't really talked about, Michael Myers' costume. I think it's great. Obviously, the iconicness of that and the music together is crazy stuff. And then the character itself, like the heavy breathing, I think is really creepy. I like that a lot. It's kind of just like, I think Carpenter, I don't know, obviously he didn't write, the entire movie, but the thought of, this guy being a psycho and sort of just like the subtleness of a psycho, like they're not going to talk. He's like this unkillable machine. He doesn't have any lines, but just him breathing, I don't know, it really creeps me out. So I like that a lot too.
Yeah. And well, something really interesting is that when Carpenter was directing this movie, he was very minimal with like what he would give to the actor that was playing Michael Myers and doing the role of the shape. It would be very simply as, your direction here is to walk from this point to that point, because like that is singularly what Michael Myers is thinking and feeling right now. And it's just like point A to point B, kill, boom. Like it's not some deeper, like emotional thread that you need to put into this performance. It's just like, this is like a cold-hearted killer who's got to move from point A to point B, stab people. And at the end of the day, his goal is to just get Jamie Lee Curtis, which I think is definitely really interesting. And something else that I think is really cool is like Carpenter is like a lover of horror. And this movie has a lot of tributes to the Psycho franchise, particularly the name Loomis comes from that, from Psycho. And Jamie Lee Curtis's own mom, Janet Leigh, was, in the original in Psycho. So, and she was kind of tapped as like, oh, should they get Jamie Lee to do the Psycho 2, which she didn't, thankfully. She was in Halloween instead. But just kind of that cool tradition of horror. And there's a lot of other references, I'm sure, to the movies that have come before.
There's a couple that like really resonate with me. One being the nurse at the beginning with Loomis, when they are first driving to Smith's Grove. Her name is Marion, and I believe that's who Jamie Lee's mom's character's name in Psycho is also Marion. And then there's a part in the movie where Laurie's like with the kids and they're watching the movie. One of the movies that they're watching on TV is The Thing. And I thought that was interesting that I think in 84 Carpenter did The Thing.
Yep.
Which I think that was
a couple years later. 81 maybe. 82.
I had the even number part, just not the. And so a couple years later, he does his own rendition of The Thing. I thought was pretty neat.
Yeah, I mean, it's just showing that even back 4 years later, he had this love for that original The Thing from Another World, and then he gets to go on and make it, which I think The Thing for me is like my favorite of his movies. I think that film is an utter masterpiece. Why don't we move on to the bad stuff? Kody, it seems like you have more that you want to say, so hit us with it. What's the bad stuff about Halloween?
Yeah, I have a decent amount for this category, but off the bat, I'm going to be super controversial here. First thing off the bat as well, too. I think, I don't know if the slow burn is effective. We were talking about that earlier. I think this movie feels long. And like you were saying, I mean, it's only like an hour 30, hour 40, but literally nothing happens in the first hour. So I don't know if we can get away with that. Other than a dead dog. A lot of dead dogs recently. But the big thing I want to talk about is the music overplayed. I think it slightly is. And there's other movies that are obvious examples. Korbin, I know you love The Lobster. Great film. And even like recently with The Batman, where they played Nirvana like 4 times. Like, I don't know. Are we giving it a pass just because it's such good music that they use it like 10 times? I think it kind of gets annoying a little bit. That'd be my biggest argument. Like, I love music, like I said, but I don't know. They play it 10 times and it kind of just gets old.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think it might be right on that line of where it is a little bit too much. I think when it becomes like so noticeable and so recognizable, I think that's when you're hitting that point. If you think of it, it's like almost Michael Myers' like superhero theme, akin to like the Avengers theme or the Iron Man theme. And for those to become recognizable, you have to hear them first, right? Like they have to be played in conjunction with certain imagery. So like for it to become that iconic moment, like it has to be well utilized, but also at the same time, like it is probably a little bit tired and used a little bit too much. So I hear where you're coming from, Kody.
Yeah, The Lobster. I think we need to do like an actual comparison with this movie, The Lobster, and see like which one plays their theme more. So I believe, I think in the past we talked about that earlier, something on Letterboxd I'd seen from you, and you're like, I don't like this movie because they play the same theme over and over and over again. So I want to see the stats on it and see how close it is. Because maybe just like the theme's that good, you do want to keep hearing it, which is fair. But I kind of want to see like numbers comparison. Anyways, there's another big thing I want to talk about. Can anybody tell me, why does nobody know how to unlock a door in this? Like, there's like 3 houses and everybody keeps getting locked in. The first girl gets killed, gets locked in the laundry room somehow. I don't even know how she did that. And then
she gets like stuck in a window.
Well, that was after. She like locked herself in, but it was Michael Myers, right? And then she tried to get out the window to go from there. And then at the end, I mean, Jamie Lee does it like 3 times. Her own house she can't get into. And then the back door, there's like a rake blocking it, which I love. I think that's so creative. But I don't know. It seems just like an easy way to keep people in, which is what you need in a movie like this. But I mean, come on, like somebody needs to figure this out. It's not that hard. You just, you flip the lock and you walk out. Jamie Lee needs some lessons, I think. But I was literally, I'm sorry. I was literally just like yelling at this movie like 3 times. Unlock the door. Like, it's not that hard.
Well, Kody, you're identifying something that is like the age-old tradition of horror movies of like they have fucking idiot characters that sometimes you yell at the screen. And I think Halloween, especially, Tyler, this new trilogy, there are some dumb choices that are made. You always say, I mean, it's that like, in hindsight, right? 2020, it's so easy to be the person in the movie that's like, just fucking unlock the door or don't go in there or don't, you should know better. But obviously in the situation, you've got to suspend that disbelief. Like it's a horror movie, characters are going to make dumb decisions. It's going to happen. And you kind of just have to accept it. This movie is definitely not the dumbest of characters in even the Halloween franchise. For me, just a couple nitpicky things. There's the obvious, like, how does Michael Myers learn how to drive? Like, there's a throwaway line in the movie where he's like, maybe somebody taught him. And then I think later in like another one of the movies, they like retroactively give an explanation for it. And there's in like the book novelization version that they wrote before the movie came out, but it's not like based on the book. It's kind of confusing. But in the novelization, it's like alluded that he like watches over the shoulder of somebody and learns how to drive, like when he like takes trips to the courthouse, which I think is just stupid. I don't know. It's just like one of those things that clearly they didn't have an explanation for, so they just brushed over it. Michael Myers shouldn't be able to drive. He's been in like under care since he was 6 years old.
I guess. I feel like it doesn't really matter, but I mean, how hard is it to drive though? He can drive.
I don't know, Cody. It's kind of difficult. He drives 150 miles to get to Haddonfield.
That is a lot.
In 1978, when there's like not directions, that's all a little suspicious. This is also just a dumb thing. Is like, why does that girl just strip naked in the middle of the kitchen? Like, she pours butter on herself, which I get, and then she's like, "Oh, I'm babysitting this girl. Like, let me just get naked in the kitchen." And then that moves on to like everybody is just like pretty flippant. Like, all the teens just kind of do whatever they want. Like, there's the house that the girl is supposed to be being watched at, that she sends them over to hang out with Jamie Lee Curtis, and then she goes and gets killed. So then the other teenagers are like, okay, let's just go to this house and have sex and like take beers from the fridge. Like, the parents are never going to come home. And there's just kind of this idea of like, we can literally do anything we want and nobody's going to be around, which I guess in the end causes their own deaths. So, good or bad.
I mean, where are their parents on Halloween? There's kind of like, it's kind of weird. I feel like there's minimal trick-or-treaters. There's no parents. There must be like some big party that.
Well, it's like supposed to be later, but then like, why are you out? So like, it's just strange. Like in every Halloween movie, this always happens. Like, people are out so late for no reason. Everybody's always getting babysitters on Halloween.
And their neighbors don't care if they're screaming in the streets either. They're like banging on that one house next to it. They don't care. So adults, I don't even know if they exist in this universe, if I'm being honest, but yeah.
Tyler, what do you think is the bad stuff?
Well, for one, I think just overall the acting. I get kind of lost in the acting sometimes. Besides from Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode, and I enjoy Donald Pleasance as Sam Loomis. There's just not very many redeeming actors or actresses that I could like, after watching the movie, I was like, wow, they did a really good job. And I think part of that is, I mean, if you look at the cast, I mean, there's not very many.
What else are these people in?
Yeah.
Other than the two you mentioned.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And even then, like Donald Pleasance, I don't think I've seen him in anything else other than Halloween. And then another thing is like the 70s, like a late 70s, early 80s film. There's a lot of like just mistakes, like filming wise. Like one of them that was like, I noticed one of the opening scenes where the nurse and Loomis are driving to the hospital to pick him up, and they're all escaped out, and he gets on top of the vehicle and his hand like crashes into the window. If you like look closely at the hand, you can see like they put like a wrench or something on his hand to make it be able to crash, where he wouldn't have had a wrench ever. Like, where would he have gotten a wrench? So like that wasn't supposed to be there, and I don't think that was supposed to be seen. And then another thing I didn't enjoy a lot, there's a lot of like, I feel like time filling like shots where there's like overly long shots of after they even like walk out of camera, they're just pandering to that specific part. And I think part of the reason is I just think that was just to fill time.
And I agree. That's kind of what I was saying with the slow burn too. Like, it's like we said, it's not a long movie, but there are just some like lingering long shots, which again kind of just adds to the movie as a whole. But it does at times like, okay, like go to the next thing or whatever. But and then as well, Donald Pleasance, he's actually Blofeld in like the old James Bond movies. That's what I know him from. But you are right with the actors too. Like, I don't know any of these people. The guy with the glasses, I think he was especially bad. Yeah, Bob. Shout out Bob. Bring Bob on the pod. But yeah, no, I think the performance-wise, not the strong suit of this movie, which I think Carpenter knew that too. But I think you're definitely right there.
Let's move on to the ugly of this movie. And I think the first thing that I want to kind of just talk about is just like, within the world of like the final girl movies where you have like this female character that makes it to the end, more often than not, it's because they're holier than thou or like are more morally sound than the other characters. So in this case, Jamie Lee Curtis is kind of like a Girl Scout, and she doesn't have sex like everybody else does. And sex is really kind of the thing that almost spurns Michael a little bit. You know, in the opening scene with his sister, she's naked and he goes in and he kills her. And then, you know, he sees the other girl get naked in the kitchen, like we talked about. There's the two people that are having sex, whether those things maybe simultaneously they piss Michael off, and they also like act as reasons for the people to be distracted, which then allows Michael to kind of get the jump on them and kill them. I think in general, it's like that idea of like, oh, just because like you have sex, like you should die in a horror movie. It's a classic trope. It always happens. It's the same thing with like drinking or smoking, which funnily enough, in this movie, Laurie does smoke weed and still survives. But to me, it's just like these tired old tropes that kind of happen where it's just like, just because you're morally good, you'll survive the evil. And because this is like the first one, I don't want to, you know, give it too much flack because it's really more often other people copied from this movie, but it was the source of a trope that then lasted for, you know, the next 50 years, which at this point I think is pretty tired and definitely outdated.
I think you're definitely right, but I think like all of the other movies copying it like shows how effective it was in this one. So
yeah,
it's
and I
kind
mean,
of
it's
a
like
compliment.
you're putting the goodest good against like the most evil, and like it's easy to see why there should be that conflict. But I don't know. I'm interested by characters that have issues, right? Like a perfect character at the center isn't necessarily what I always want to see.
Yeah, fair. My ugly, I couldn't come up with too much of this. I think, you know, surprisingly, a movie from the 70s is pretty up to date. But I did want to shout out, we're going back to the dog again, but it's the different dog. The dog he eats, I guess. So obviously when the doctor and the cop show up to his house, they say the body's still warm. I guess he got hungry. And then they also, it's a throwaway line that was possibly a skunk. So we've narrowed down Michael Myers, you know, food choice, the dog or skunk. I'd say it's pretty ugly. That's about as ugly as it gets. Also, I don't know how you can't tell the difference between a dog and a skunk. That may be their own issue, but yeah, I don't know. I didn't have too much like ugliness in this movie, surprisingly. That's pretty gross.
Tyler, what do you think?
See, I kind of included, like when I was doing like my notes, I kind of included the bad and the ugly in the same thing. Yeah, the dog thing, I mean, that's kind of gross.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think like Kody says, this movie holds up really well for being like a 78 film. Like in a modern world, there really isn't a lot to like point out as like the ugly. And also to the like point of being ugly, this movie isn't terribly gory for being like a slasher film. It is pretty mild in a lot of the kills.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's only rated R because there's boobs, basically. That's kind of it. I feel like blood wise, there isn't a ton. Like you get some slashes and some blood squibs, but I feel like the gore for the kills was kind of kept down, which is interesting. I mean, that might have a lot to do with the budget, to be fair. But yeah,
true.
That is funny. Like it's rated R, but they don't really go into anything like too disgusting out of it. They don't even show the dead dog. So yeah, tough.
And then I think kind of going back to like sexual intercourse in the movie, that in that long opening shot where his sister's boyfriend takes her upstairs and is maybe up there for 25, 30 seconds and then comes back down. I mean, I think his short endurance kind of saved his life, I suppose, but
well said. He does survive. That's a good point.
That open shot where it takes her upstairs and then Michael has enough time to walk back around the house through the back door, grab the knife, and then he's already on his way back downstairs saying, "I'll call you tomorrow."
That is a very good point.
Respect.
Lesson learned from Halloween. Yeah. All right, let's move on to weird movie details trivia.
Naked grandma.
Naked, huh?
I got a couple questions here. I'll start us with the first one. How many Halloween movies are there? And there are choices. Is it 12, 13, 14, or 15?
I've been saying 15 this entire time, but I feel like that's probably wrong. I'll guess 13. I'll guess in the middle.
What do you think, Tyler?
That's 13.
It is 13. There's 13 movies. Look at you. Look at that, Kody. You're an animal.
My guessing game's on point. And that's funny. It's kind of like a riff on Friday the 13th too. Kind of poke at them maybe. Not really. But my trivia questions also revolve around the franchise as a whole. I think they're pretty fun. So I'm gonna shoot over to Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. I want you guys to tell me who is like the lead in that movie. I do have options because of a lot of movies, obviously. Is it Johnny Depp, Jamie Lee Curtis, which she's in a lot, Paul Rudd, or Josh Hartnett? Talking about Halloween 6.
Not Paul Rudd. I don't think it's Jamie Lee Curtis.
Not Ant-Man, dude?
No. Who'd you say? Who's the last one?
It was Johnny Depp and Josh Hartnett.
I'm gonna say,
Hartnett?
yeah, I'm gonna say, yeah, Josh Hartnett. Because why would you put him in there?
All right, Tyler, what are you thinking?
It's Paul Rudd.
It is Paul Rudd.
Wow, damn.
Corbin was distant, but yeah, I was looking through the franchise. Josh Hartnett does star in one as well.
He's in H2O. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, Paul Rudd, young Paul Rudd. He's looking great, but I thought that was really funny.
Okay, fair enough. Tyler, we'll throw it over to you for your question.
I guess I don't really have options for mine. I didn't think of
That's
one.
fine.
The Myers mask. It was like a go get this mask, bring it back, and we'll just paint it up and do what we need to do with it. What actor or character is that mask based off of?
Well, we've actually talked about this on the pod in the past, and Kody is now forgetting something. I'll just speak generically about the mask while Kody thinks. It kind of, because of that fact, has a certain magic to it. Like there's that worn quality. It's just literally this person's face. It's a shitty version of their face that's painted white. And then, in subsequent Halloween films, they kind of try to recreate that magic. And I don't think they ever really quite do it. I think, especially in like the new ones, the mask, it doesn't look great. It kind of, endures some fire in other, natural effects that, have an effect on it, but it never quite, recaptures that original magic. Kody, do you know who it is? Did you figure it out?
I think I do remember. My initial thought, and I think it was my guess last time when this was brought up, was Nixon. For some reason, it kind of looks like Nixon. But I believe it is William Shatner, is it not? Star Trek man himself?
It is William Shatner, your boy.
That is my boy. That's a great question, though. And something like going into it, probably like nobody really knows that, I feel like, on a first time watch at least. So, yeah. That is funny. Corbin, do you have another question? You said you
well,
did, right?
I did have one question, and it was actually it was asking what movie was showing on the TV for the kids. We talked about already the thing, but this is kind of adjacent to slashers. In the 1998 remake of Psycho, who stars? And I can give you choices if you need, if you don't know. Well, here are the choices. Is it?
I know the answer, Bob.
Okay, well then go ahead,
I
guys.
know it too.
Who stars?
Go for it, Todd.
Is it Vince Vaughn?
It is Vince Vaughn.
So bad. Have you seen any part of that movie? I haven't watched it all the way through, but I've seen a couple scenes and it's god awful.
I didn't know anything about it until I just recently watched Psycho for the first time, and Mina mentioned to me like, oh, hey, there's this Vince Vaughn version. It looks insane. Also has Julianne Moore and directed by Gus Van Sant. Speaking of Jake Ross, his boy, his Good Will Hunting boy.
It should have been good, honestly. The thing is, like, they did a shot-for-shot remake of it. So it's the exact same movie Psycho with just Vince Vaughn just like overacting like crazy. It's funny. Definitely go look it up.
How about, here's another one. In Bates Motel, who plays the mom?
Oh, man. I probably couldn't tell you that.
We've talked about her recently, as last episode.
It's some blonde chick. I don't know.
It's Vera Farmiga, Kody.
Is it Vera Farmiga?
Yes.
Wow. That is completely lost my memory. For some reason, I was thinking Kate Blanchett, but not for Vera. But I do have one other question.
Let's hear it.
It does have to do with Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, which I think is a very interesting sequel. I guess you can call it that. It is basically just its own thing. But the question is, which iconic world landmark, basically, I don't know how to word this question because it's so weird, but there's this iconic landmark that sort of like powers these microchips that the villains are making, and they're putting them in all of the Halloween masks during Halloween, and then when the kids are all wearing them that night, the microchips go off and they all get killed. That's the plan. But they all draw their power from some iconic world landmark. What is that landmark? And I have options.
I know what it is.
Really? All right, go for it then.
Stonehenge, right?
Yes, it is. And this is one of the ones I have seen played of. And it's a lot of fun. I feel like if you don't take this movie seriously, you can have a lot of fun with it. But for some reason, the Stonehenge thing always like stuck out to me as like, why would I use that specifically? I feel like it's really dumb, but still a lot of fun.
Tyler, what do you think about Season of the Witch?
In my like ranking, it's pretty high up there for me. And like just the Halloween rankings, I enjoy it a lot. Like what Kody said, it's if you go into it like wanting to see Michael Myers, you're gonna be very disappointed. Besides for that, like 2 seconds he's on the screen where they're watching Halloween.
Yeah.
But like if you go into it just wanting to watch, I mean, an 80s horror movie, it's very enjoyable. And like I said,
it's so different from the rest of the franchise too, which I think is cool. Like they went that way with the third one, and they didn't really go back. They kept coming back to Michael Myers, which is fine. But I kind of wish like they branched out and did more stuff like that. I think it's actually not the worst thing they've ever done. Weirdly enough,
I was recently listening to the Big Picture podcast, which I'm a big fan of, and they were talking about the Halloween franchise, and they talked about how like if they had just done Season of the Witch as the second movie, then this whole franchise would be vastly different. Because the problem is you do Halloween and then you do Halloween 2 and Michael Myers comes back and he's still like a part of it. And then you make Halloween 3 and it's like Michael Myers isn't really around. And while it still kind of has that spirit of Halloween, of like, you know, the same ambience and atmosphere of the other ones, it just fails because it's not what people are expecting. Whereas if you had made it right away, this is the second movie, then you almost open the door for, here's a whole world of anthology stories that we could tell, which I think would have almost been more interesting than focusing on Michael Myers in 12 different movies.
Yeah, that is true. I kind of wish it was, like you said, like make that the sequel. I feel like you maybe have like a Black Mirror-esque kind of anthology series, just like in horror though. I think that would have been interesting. But what we got, you know, wasn't the worst thing either.
I think Carpenter's like original plan for Halloween, and that's why it has such like a vague title as Halloween instead of something like Nightmare on Elm Street, where these kids are living on Elm Street. Like the vague title of Halloween comes from, I think, Carpenter wanting to do an anthology series where the movies would take place always on Halloween night, but it'd be just a different story with that same kind of feel for each new like sequel or movie. And I think just Michael Myers got so popular where people wanted him to come back, and he's making too much money for whoever the film companies or whatever to like kind of ignore that.
He kind of made like too good of a villain. Like you said, you made so much money off this one character. Of course, the studio's going to throw like millions more to pump it out. So that's a good point.
Before we move on, something interesting with that too is like Carpenter didn't make a lot of money off this movie because I don't think he had like the same profit sharing that you would have gotten just because it was like an independent film. And a lot of they wanted him to come back and maybe direct some later. And his big thing was like, if you're going to do that, I want to be paid retroactively, like what you would owe me for, making that first movie that, was $300 million at the box office or whatever. So I think that's interesting. Let's take a quick commercial break and we'll be right back. And we're back with Welcome to the Academy.
There's a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture.
Moonlight won.
Give us real or fake awards. Tyler, why don't you take it away? What awards do you want to give Halloween?
I think just like the common answer, I think all three of us will kind of like talk about is, best score. Luckily, I think if it would like went to the Academy Awards, I went into the 79th not 79th, the Academy Awards that happened in 79. And I can't tell you the award winners, but I think in 78.
Well, here you go. I can. In 79, Midnight Express, Giorgio Moroder, The Boys from Brazil, Jerry Goldsmith, Days of Heaven, Ennio Morricone, Heaven Can Wait, Dave Grusin, and Superman by John Williams. So
Superman's good. That's a good score.
But I think 78 has Star Wars in it too, and I don't think the Halloween score holds up to Star Wars as well as what I would like it to. But I think in 79 it'd be more competitive if it was in that category.
Yeah,
for sure.
That was definitely one of mine as well. And I do have a positive one and a negative one. My positive one, I'll start off with that one as well. But I think this is like the best movie set on October 31st, which again is probably a very controversial statement because there's so many horror movies I haven't seen. But I feel like there's not a ton of great movies actually set on the day, October 31st. And this is one of the best. So yeah, a lot of good horror movies, but I think for that exact day, this probably takes the cake.
Yeah, I think this captures an interesting thing of like there's horror movies can kind of exist at any time of the year. And even though like typically during Halloween, like is when we talk about them, like they can happen at any time. This one is very specific to the month of October, to that kind of fall feeling, to the night of Halloween, which I think is great. I would like to give this movie the award for one of the best POV shots. I think that opening is really interesting, where it's from the point of view of young Michael Myers. Just some background on it. It appears to be a single tracking point of view shot. There's actually 3 cuts hidden within it, because the cameras that they were using, the Panavision cameras, could only do 5 minutes of footage at a time. So they couldn't just record it as like one long take, which is just, again, like a budget constraint thing. But the first cut comes when he puts the mask on. The second and third are after the murder's taken place, and he's leaving the room. And it was just kind of done to like make the point of view move faster, but definitely really cool shot with the mask on, especially. And it's something that they don't do for the rest of the movie, but it became kind of, again, another horror trope, these point of view shots that get used over and over, where it's like you see from the perspective of the killer. But I think in its limited use, it's really well done and is really great in this movie.
Another thing that's interesting about that POV shot at the beginning of the movie, it's actually done by Deborah Hill, who's one of the writers on the film. She said her hands were small enough to look like child's hands, to where like, so she got to, I guess, put on the mask and be Michael Myers for that moment.
Yeah, that's really cool. One other award, I just want to talk about like movie villains, and like especially horror movie villains. Do you guys think is Michael Myers? I don't think he's probably the scariest, but do you think he's, I guess, maybe the most iconic horror movie villain?
I would say he's got to be up there. I mean, I'd say maybe Freddy, has the edge for me in that case. And there's so many good, like, iconic villains. But like Mike, he's got to be in the conversation. Like, I feel like he's top 2, top 3 pretty easily.
Yeah.
How about Freddy, Jason, Leatherface, Michael Myers? Who's the best?
That's tough. Ty, what do you think? I don't know.
Are we saying like who's my favorite, or who's, if we like put them in a boxing ring and they have?
Let's hear both.
Put them in a boxing ring.
My favorite's obvious. My favorite's Michael Myers. In order, if I had to go, like my favorite would be Myers, Jason, Freddy, and then probably Leatherface. But in like who I think is like the strongest, I would probably go Jason, Freddy, Leatherface, and then Myers. Just because, I mean, one thing about like Michael Myers in this movie specifically, he's not the biggest person. I mean, he's an average sized dude. And you look at those other 3, Jason's been this towering figure, Leatherface is a towering figure, and then Freddy has the powers, I guess. But yeah, I would go like based on strength, Jason, Freddy, Leatherface, and then Michael Myers.
I think Myers is probably my favorite. I think he's like the one that seems the realist. I mean, especially Freddy in particular is probably the furthest from reality, because I mean, just don't fall asleep, right, and you'll be fine. I don't know if Michael Myers sleeps at all or not. But I think something also interesting is Michael Myers is almost like a kid a little bit. Like he's not like plotting, he's sadistic, but he's not, like he doesn't have some deep plan. He's just, kind of walk, stab, because he's basically, just like a 6-year-old that has lived for 20 years.
Yeah, I don't think he has the smarts really to win any battles, but I mean, he's got the stabbing ability, so I'll give him that. But yeah, I think that is, honestly, I think that's the correct list of like power wise too. So that's funny. My other award I want to give this movie, I think this is the worst movie over 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm going back to that. I'm harping on it. I think that's ridiculous. I don't know, like, I didn't do the ultimate research, like how many people, did reviews and stuff, but I mean, it's probably up there with the worst ones. The other one off the top of the head is 8th Grade as well. So I know you like Corbin, but I mean, I think 95% of Rotten Tomatoes is absolutely ridiculous for this flick. And it's a good film. I think it should be like maybe even 90. I'm fine with. But to be on that upper echelon, there's not that many. And Rotten Tomatoes is a broken system, obviously. But yeah, I don't know why, but I just really don't like that.
Fair enough. 81 reviews, Kody, to get there.
A lot. No,
not bad.
Could be more. I'll leave a little review. Bring it down a little bit.
This podcast will serve as that. All right, let's move on to Invite, Fight, and Night.
I dubbed thee Sir William.
Kody, who do you want to invite on the pod from this movie?
Yeah, I don't know if this will actually work, but I do want to invite Mike Myers on the pod. I want to hear his story. Evidently, he doesn't talk. We may have to start him out with some breathing exercises and stuff. I think it'd be really interesting. I want to hear his story. Why did he kill sister? What was he doing? In the psych ward for 10 years, however long it was. I think he'd be a great guest if we can get him. But yeah, love to see Mikey on the show.
I was gonna go for the low hanging fruit of Mike Myers. We always like to make the jokes of let's just get the villain, but Kody, he doesn't talk. That's not good content. Come on, be smarter. I want to get John Carpenter on the pod. I think he's just a super interesting dude. He'd be a great guy to chat movies with, and definitely someone that I admire. Tyler, who would you want to invite on the podcast from the Halloween universe?
I said Loomis. I think it'd be interesting to have him on the podcast, especially, if you could find a way to have him talk about the 15 years from what we've seen to what we've seen. Like what happened in that 15 years that we didn't get to see.
That's true. Yeah, maybe we should have Loomis and Mike Myers both at the same time.
That's true. Loomis could kind of be the translator.
He'd be talking and be like, that's correct. Like, right, Michael? And then he'd just be like,
and then he would stab us and
he just grunt. Yeah.
All right, Tyler, we'll stick with you. Who do you want to fight?
Obviously, like the obvious answer is Myers, but I wouldn't want to die.
Fair.
But I think if I just don't have sex on Halloween, I think I'll be all right.
Learn how to lock your door, stay inside, don't have sex. Just a typical Halloween, right?
Yeah, just move out of hat.
Kody, who do you want to fight?
Yeah, this is quickly turning into my favorite category in the pod. I'm going to fight the nurse at the beginning, actually. She's only in one scene. But I think she makes a grave mistake. Why are you opening your window? And that is specifically why I want to fight her. It's already pouring out. And then you have a known psychopath on the top of your car. It feels like you should probably, try and stay inside the car. He does smash the window, which would be a little scary. But, I think directly after he rides off with the car, I just, give her a old deck. No offense anyway, but with the nurse, what are you doing?
I'm gonna fight Loomis. That dude's shady as fuck. Never trust him. Don't trust Dr. Loomis. He deserves it. He could have done better to put Michael in a good spot. That's my take. So yeah.
And he just sat outside his house all night.
Yeah, he really doesn't do anything. He's just like he's gonna come back to this house, and then he leaves.
He sees his car parked across the street after standing there for 4 hours. Yeah, that guy's got issues. Yeah,
mainstay in the franchise throughout. And then finally, Knight. Who do we want to knight? Kody, who do you want to knight?
Yeah, again, to bring them up again, I do want to knight our two fallen dogs. They deserve better. One, maybe it was a bit annoying, barking all the time, but for good reason. And then the other, it may have been a skunk to be fair, but she's still getting knighted. So respect to both of them.
For me, I just go for the obvious. Jamie Lee Curtis, she's a GOAT. She's long tradition of Scream Queens. She is the Scream Queen. Fantastic in this movie. Starts a great career. She fights back against Michael Myers, which some people don't do as well to do, and she takes a stand and she lives because of it. So shout out to Laurie Strode.
That's a good one.
I also had Laurie Strode down. My reasoning is if I was going to be fighting Michael Myers, I'd want Laurie Strode to be my friend. That way I kind of knew how to survive.
Yeah, she's really the only person, while he continues to torment her, she's also the only person that manages to kind of fight back and survive throughout. So you definitely want her on your team.
She's done for 44 years, so.
Exactly.
She knows what she's doing.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the recast.
Bond. James Bond.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
Here's an obvious one, Kody. This, Michael Myers, he doesn't talk. He just breathes a lot. And listen, there's one guy with an iconic voice that I think that needs to take the role of Mike Myers, and it's Joe Pesci. Let's bring him in. Hey, I'm Mike Myers. What do you think about that, Kody?
A great impression. I think it could work. I'd probably vote against it though. Unless you're bringing in Macaulay Culkin, I'd probably say no.
Halloween with Macaulay Culkin as Laurie Strode. Yeah, not bad.
A Halloween Home Alone crossover. That'd be sick.
I think Robot Chicken did something like that.
Yeah.
Grandma Lori, Michael Myers is coming. We need to go.
We're safe here, all right? I've rigged this house to be ready for this day. The permits were a bitch.
Hey, turkey butts. I'm all home alone in here, so if you want me, you better come and get me.
Marv, look. Some guy is going up to the house.
Rats, Harry. We gotta wait for the kid to be alone to break in.
Or we can go rob that house.
Let's do it. What could possibly go wrong?
There is no such thing as an original idea. Tyler, who do you want to recast in this?
I said, like, for continuity issues, Tommy Doyle. He's played by Brian Enders, and this is I don't think I've seen him in anything. I don't think he's been in anything else. I'd want to recast him as a young Paul Rudd or a young Anthony Michael Hall, just for continuity issues. Anthony Michael Hall, who, I mean, he's in like all those like 80s and 90s like romance movies or whatever. And Paul Rudd, I mean, they both had their time playing Tommy Doyle, so I would just stick one of them in there just for continuity issues.
Yeah, that's good. Get the people actually in the roles they will play. There's been a lot of recasting as the franchise has gone on. Obviously, they've remade this movie 100 different times. You know, they've done reboots and resequels or whatever. They're going to do another Halloween movie. Let's do a Halloween movie set in England. And I want my final girl to be played by Emma Mackey, who is in Sex Education and is just a really great actress. And I'd love to see her in some sort of horror movie in general as kind of like the main character. So let's put her as the lead of the next Halloween franchise set in the United Kingdom.
I like that, other than the English part. I don't know what's this. Emma Mackey's great. And I'm just going to throw her into my pitch as well. I was thinking something similar. I kind of just wanted a modern day reboot. And I had a couple names come up. Florence Pugh, little Kiki Palmer, I think. Then let's throw in Emmy Mackey and Emma Mackey as well. Shout out Emmy. But and then last person I want, you got to have good kid actors. So let's throw Jacob Tremblay in there as well. You know, he's grown up. We need to milk every ounce we have out of this kid in Hollywood. And I said Jamie Lee Curtis can come back too. She can like take over kind of the doctor's role in this, maybe Loomis, if she wants. Yeah, I'd love like a new reboot. I mean, honest, I think that'd be, and I think it would make a lot of money too. So I don't know why the studio's not doing it. But yeah.
Well, probably because they just came out with Halloween Ends, and that movie was fucking ass. So
yeah, I mean they did the modern reboot. I don't know if they did it as well as they could have, but I think as like legacy sequels go, it's not the worst by far. And then the sequel to the legacy sequel is probably, I haven't seen that one to be fair. I think that just came out, didn't it?
Well, they've done it. They did a whole new trilogy.
Oh, they've done 3.
We'll talk about it later. Let's move on to our rating.
You're gonna look at me and you're gonna tell me that I'm wrong? Am I wrong?
Cody, we'll start with you. What do you want to rate this movie out of 69?
Always start with me. And I'm kind of basing this directly off of our last episode. I think I like The Conjuring a slightly bit more. So I'm going to rate Halloween 57 out of 69. Very respectable, I think.
Pretty solid. All right, Tyler?
So I had like 2 different ratings. I had like, if you're just going to watch this movie on Halloween, I think it could be anywhere between like a 61 or 62. But as a movie in general, if I was going to watch this in June, July, August, which I wouldn't, as like a 56.
Okay. Well, since this episode is coming out on Halloween, we'll go with the Halloween rating. So we'll go with 62. Is that what you want?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, we'll go 62. And then for me, I got to go a little bit lower because like, while I do think this is definitely like the quintessential slasher movie, and it's obviously like for the history of it is really great. And I love Carpenter. I just don't think it's his most successful film by any means. And I do like agree with just like it's kind of a little bit too slow to start. There's some things that don't quite add up. So I got to give it a 48 out of 69.
So your horror ratings have been just very, very low. The Conjuring, I think, was at 50. So right? I think so.
Yeah.
We're kind of in the same boat, like comparatively to those movies. But yeah, your scores are always a little low there. I love it.
Thanks. All right, let's move on to Defeat the Watchlist.
Watch me.
So, in our last episode, Abby told me to check out a movie called They Look Like People. Tyler, have you seen They Look Like People at all?
I have not.
Cody, I know you haven't. So this is a indie horror. This is actually in a similar vein, an indie horror film from 2015. And it's really interesting because kind of the way the horror is framed is essentially you have this main character who is receiving these like calls at nighttime that are telling him that there's these aliens or these creatures that are taking over people's bodies, and there's going to be a big war where they, are essentially like, it's us against them. And really what it is like he's having this like mental episode, like this potentially schizophrenic episode where he's hearing and seeing things that may or may not be there. And that's kind of where the horror lies, because it's almost like an unreliable narrator. You don't know what's real. And then he's got this like childhood friend that he's trying to decide whether or not he should drag into it, because it's like, if you knew that the world was about to end and aliens are taking over, wouldn't you want to obviously tell your best friend about that? But also at the same time, like, you've had this history of mental illness and you don't know if you can be trusted. And it's a really interesting movie. Not particularly scary, I would say, but definitely like a cool take on mental illness and horror. I think a lot of times it's been done pretty poorly. So it's just cool to see in this movie. And, it is definitely low budget, and it's kind of like that modern low budget where you can tell it's a low budget, whereas like Halloween was still shot like with film cameras, so it still looks great. But yeah, they look like people. I would recommend it. Give it a shot. Now we throw it over to Tyler. Tyler, you get to pick the next movie that I watch. So I have a giant watch list. We can pick a particular year or a genre and shuffle, or if there's a movie you want me to watch, you can just tell me. There's really a lot of different ways we can do this, but it's kind of over to you to run the show.
How much Carpenter have you seen?
I've seen Vampires, The Thing, Big Trouble in Little China, and Halloween. So 4 of his movies.
I'll recommend another Carpenter film. This one's called They Live.
They Live. Okay.
Oh yeah. I love that movie. That's actually great rec. All
right, awesome. Well, I will watch They Live and then report back next week with
I want to spew out some quotes from that movie, but I won't spoil it to you. But yeah, next week we have to talk about that a little bit. Great.
Appreciate you holding off. All right, now we're gonna move on to the next category. We have a Podgorithm. This is a category where I draw a random card from the Blockbuster movie deck, and then we each have 30 seconds to give a hot take on it. And the movie, I did go for a horror film, and the movie is Scream. Has everybody seen Scream? Kody, have you seen Scream?
Yeah.
All right, Tyler, you have 30 seconds. What's your take on Scream?
I think Wes Craven, the person that directed Scream, is up there. I think some of his stuff's better than Carpenter's. But I think Scream is like the quintessential 90s horror film. I think Scream did for 90s horror as what Carpenter did for late 70s, early 80s horror. With the way it's shot, the way it's acted, the way it's directed. I really enjoy it, and I think it's one of those films where it can kind of end any moment with like the series or whatever, but it's also going to go on forever just because of the new killer every film.
Kody, Scream, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I haven't seen the entirety of the franchise. Obviously, kind of similar to Halloween, where they're still making these movies, which is pretty impressive. But the original I do like a lot. I think Drew Barrymore is probably a little underutilized. The cast is great, and the cast has like been one of the things that's stuck with the franchise. Courtney Cox and even like Nev Campbell, they're still doing these movies today. I think that's how transcendent they are a little bit. But I do like the first one a lot. I do need to check out more of the franchise. I think Courtney, you've seen a bit more of them than me, but I heard the new one wasn't bad either, so I might have to check it out.
Yeah, I've only actually seen the original and then the reboot that they did this year, which I guess is technically Scream 5. But Scream, the original, is my favorite horror movie of all time, I would say.
Oh, wow.
Well, maybe second behind Get Out, but Scream is really fantastic. I think some people look down upon it a little bit. I think even John Carpenter was quoted as saying like, this shit's like too winky, and it's kind of like ruined slasher movies because it's like now everything has to be self-referential and aware of itself, and it kind of almost takes away from things. So he had some beef with Wes Craven there. But personally, I think Scream is like the perfect culmination of 30 years of horror filmmaking, and it is truly scary. It's referential, but it's also fun. The Ghostface killer keeps you guessing. It is an iconic design. And it's got a fantastic cast. Shout out Matthew Lillard's Shaggy, man. He's great.
Sure.
All right. And we'll move on to our final category, our recommendations. What have we been into?
I drink your milkshake. I drink it up.
Kody, do you want to take it away? What do you want to recommend to the people?
Yeah, sure. I don't have too much for this episode. Obviously, we're recording these 2 Halloween ones back to back as well. So it's kind of just everything I forgot to talk about last episode. But I have been checking out some TV. The Mandalorian, I've still been working my way through. I think I only have like 3 or 4 episodes left in season 2, which I believe is the last season as well. Or they're making another one, obviously. But I just got to the episode where Ahsoka Tano's in it. I thought it was a great episode. Shout out Rosario Dawson. And then as well, another Disney thing I've been watching. For some reason, I started watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. again. So I'll tell you what, I like this show. I think it's a good show. I've actually been doing a thing where, I saw this thing on TikTok where basically it would go over like all the IMDb ratings of every episode in a show, which I think is really interesting. And I started doing it for this one. So I think I'm like 17 episodes in already, been binging it like a week. And I just got to the episode where the whole Hydra thing happens. But season 1's pretty bad. The majority of my ratings are like in the 6s, a couple in the 7s, a couple in the 8s. But not a great show the first season. It does pick up in the next couple. So definitely keep you updated there. But yeah, I kind of think that's really interesting, like rating every single episode. I wish there was an app where like you could put in a rating for every single episode and then they would just say it for you. So
I think it's like you just said it. It's called the IMDb app. So
yeah, but I don't like IMDb in general.
You want Letterboxd for shows.
Yes.
There is something, I don't have the title of it, but I did come across something that was kind of similar to that idea. It just like didn't seem as like clean and as polished, but yeah, there's definitely a market for it.
Yeah, there was like a specific app I think that did something similar, but it was not really what I was looking for. So maybe I'm just sitting on a moneymaker and I don't know. Might have to pump out an app.
Yeah, hey, you got a lot of free time right now, Kody. So get to coding or something, I'd say. Tyler, what do you want to recommend to the people? What have you been into?
Well, just keep it like horror themed. Season 2 of Chucky came out. It's like a Chucky. I don't want to say it's a reboot, but it's like a sequel show.
That's on Peacock, right? I think I saw.
Oh, I know it's coming out like weekly on like USA Network and
okay,
Sci-Fi. But I think they like drop on Peacock on Thursdays. And I'm enjoying that. It's got a lot of the original cast from like the first film. Like I think Brad Dourif is great as the voice of Chucky. And then so I guess that's like my more like horror themed, but another Halloween thing that I seen on Hulu a couple weeks ago. It's called the Polanyi Show Halloween special. It's from the people that made Rick and Morty. So like that. What's his name?
I know who you're talking about.
I should know. I have no idea.
Dan Harmon?
Yeah.
Or Justin Roiland?
Yeah, it's Justin Roiland. It's like a Rick and Morty type, like Halloween special, like variety show where they have like they get like a bunch of different like animators on the show to like animate like their own little skits, like based around Halloween. So I mean, it's enjoyable. I mean, it's not like super scary, but like I enjoyed that a lot. It was kind of funny.
Yeah, that's cool. I haven't heard about that. I'll just check it out.
And then I guess another thing I'm thinking about starting back up is I seen something on Twitter the other day where Bryan Cranston's wanting to like do a Malcolm in the Middle reboot. Yeah. So I'm starting to think about trying to maybe rewatch Malcolm in the Middle to get ready for that.
Not a bad rec at all. Malcolm in the Middle. It's a classic. Frankie Muniz, man.
Shout out Frankie Muniz.
I want to see that revival. I really do.
Yeah, I think it'd be good. For me, I've just got a couple like releases this year. It's actually been a pretty solid year for horror. So I've talked about some of these movies in the past, but I just want to give them a couple shout outs. So first one's Barbarian, which actually just came out on HBO Max. If you haven't watched that yet, I think is a really interesting horror movie, kind of flips the genre on its head a little bit, broken into a couple different acts. And definitely the less you know about it, the better. But some really fun performances and some good scares. X, which is an A24 horror movie. They also did a prequel, Pearl, and they're supposed to be making a third movie. These are all from Ty West. Fun, horror movie kind of slasher thing set on a farm. Fresh, Daisy Edgar Jones and Sebastian Stan just came out early this year on Hulu that you can watch. Just, a fun little cannibal story.
It's one where they're dancing, right?
Yeah.
I guess that was early there.
Yeah, early January. Bodies, 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 which is also an A24 one, more of like the Gen Z horror type film, which is pretty fun. And then there's this other one called Speak No Evil, which this movie's pretty messed up. It's kind of like this foreign horror film about a family who meets these people on vacation and then goes to visit them after the fact. And then, things ensue, messed up stuff, unsurprisingly. Also on Netflix this week, they've started this Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities anthology series. We've kind of discussed earlier with Season of the Witch, and then even this thing that you just brought up on Hulu. It's basically Guillermo del Toro's like producing, and it's these episodes where these horror directors are coming in and doing like 45-minute, just like one-off horror tales. The first one stars Tim Blake Nelson, who's in Holes famously. And it's kind of like a Storage Wars horror movie. And then it's just supposed to be a bunch of these other like fun little one-off horror stuff that will have, by the time this episode comes out, have all released. So go check that out if you're wanting to get spooked. And then just the last thing, generally speaking, is just the streaming service Shudder. If you're not familiar with it, I've talked about it before. It's only like $5.99 a month. Halloween is available on Shudder, as well as just a lot of other horror classics and a lot of original content as well. So if you're a horror fan, I would definitely recommend checking out Shudder. All right, guys. Well, this has been a discussion on Halloween. Any final thoughts?
Not too much. Appreciate you coming on, Ty. That was actually a fun episode. I think, like for horror movies, especially based around Halloween, I think we got two really good ones. So yeah, great pick.
Yeah, Tyler, thank you so much for coming on. It was a great time to have you.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
All right. Well, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next week with a less spooky episode.
Psycho.
Peace.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.